Most people believe that the most expensive thing they pay for is the house they live in. Wrong. It's their coke habit. But even if you don't have a coke habit, I've got some bad news for you. You still pay for something that's far more expensive than your house. It's called your government. That's right, the thing that you spend the most on every single year isn't your car, your house, or your coke habit. It's the government that you live under. And it's costing you more than you think. More than a coke habit, that's for sure. I'm Topher Field. I'm a political commentator and documentary filmmaker. If you haven't seen Battleground Melbourne, do yourself a favour. Go to battlegroundmelbourne.com. It is a multi-international award-winning documentary all about the madness that went on the streets of Melbourne, Australia, as we became the most locked-down city on Earth. So go to battlegroundmelbourne.com and watch it there completely for free. And while you're watching, please make sure you leave a like, a comment, a subscribe, and ring that bell. I'd really appreciate it. Popular financial wisdom says that you too could be a squillionaire if you were just willing to stop drinking soy lattes and smashing avocados. Side note, what's with the violence against avocados? I mean, they're basically harmless, and here we are just... What did they ever do to deserve that? Did they traumatize your childhood or something? Show me on the avocado where the avocado hurt you. Listen, not drinking soy lattes and stopping smashing avocados is pretty good financial advice as far as it goes, but simple arithmetic tells us that it's not going to solve the problem of how to keep up with our bills when they seem to be never-ending and our money certainly ends. The real reason why it's actually hard to make ends meet from month to month is actually quite simple, and it's one of those things that it's not very obvious until you see it, and then once you see it, you can't unsee it. You'll be seeing it for the rest of your life. So how about we just dive in? Everyone loves that time of the month. No, not that time of the month. I mean the payday time of the month. The time of the month where your bank account is suddenly full of fat stacks of cash. Problem is, obviously, you've got to pay your tax, which is going to be about a third depending on how much you get paid, which kind of sucks. But you know what? It's not too bad because all of the rest of the money that made it into your bank account, well, that's yours. You can spend it on whatever you want, right? Well, only sort of. You can spend it, but it doesn't mean it's all your money because there's going to be a 10% GST on absolutely everything you buy, and that sucks, but oh well. And then it's all yours, right? Well, no, because every litre of petrol that you buy or every litre of beer that you buy or cask of wine, I'm cheap, you're going to be paying excise on that too, so that's going to add up to quite a bit. And then it's all yours, right? Well, except you've got to pay council rates, and you are paying those even if you're renting. You might not be the one that actually pays that bill, but that bill is very much added on to your rent, so that's going to cost you a little bit. And then actually, if you move house, you have to pay stamp duty. That could be thousands of dollars every year if you average it out from each time you move. And again, even if you're renting, you're still paying the landlord's stamp duty. So that kind of sucks. That's not great. But now it's all yours, right? Well, now most of what's left really is yours, except that, I mean, there's all the other little fees and charges, whether it's licensing fees or application fees for fishing licenses or to drive cars or all kinds of other things like that. And just constantly, this is happening little bit by little bit, little slice by slice, until actually, if you do the maths, the amount of purchasing power that you're left with out of your paycheck is less than half of what you cost your employer. Now, I said that way very specifically because actually, even this, talking about your paycheck, it doesn't tell the whole story. Because your employer not only has to put that money into your account and pay the income tax on it, but actually there's a bunch of other stuff they have to pay for too. Things like superannuation, which could be 11 or 12% on top of your salary. Now, you might think, well, hang on, superannuation, that's good. It's coming into my bank account. I get to use that in my retirement. Well, that's true. You do. It is your money eventually. But you can't spend it on the cost of living right now. But it is costing your employer right now. And there's a funny thing that happens here. Your employer has to fund the superannuation that you can't spend. You can't use it to help keep up with the cost of living, but it's actually increasing the cost of living because your employer has to make enough money back, has to set their prices at such a level that they can afford to fund the superannuation. And the same's true of the income tax that they've paid on your behalf. The same's true of the payroll tax that they're also going to have to pay as a company, and all the other myriad of fees and charges and licenses that they have to buy from the government every single year just so that they can keep operating their business. And it's this gap between the spending power that your employer has to use in order to pay you versus the spending power that you actually get out of your pay, that gap, that's where the cost of living gets really, really tough, because all of the prices of everything that you buy are being set according to the cost of the employees and everything else, of course. But as employees get more expensive, everything you buy gets more expensive because the prices get adjusted accordingly. But the employees themselves, well, they're not really benefiting. They're not really getting the amount of purchasing power that they're costing the employer, that the employer is having to fund out of the prices. Think about it. Thought experiment. You get a pay rise and your purchasing power goes up by $1,000. That's fantastic. But your cost to your employer has actually gone up by $2,000 and the prices get adjusted accordingly. And that's playing out across the entire economy, every business, every employee. Every single time there's a pay rise, you're only getting a portion of the purchasing power of what that pay rise is costing your employer. And that gap, that is why it's so hard to make ends meet. Because the prices that you're paying for absolutely everything are set according to what employees cost their employers. But the amount of money you have to spend is that minus the cost of government. And that difference, that gap, that's why you're struggling at the end of the month. That's why the month always seems to outlast the month's paycheck. And getting a pay rise is only a very short-term solution because it continues the problem. It continues the cycle. It's like a dog chasing its tail. You're chasing that pay rise, but the pay rise then pushes up the prices, but the prices go up by more than what the pay rise was worth because of the gap between what you're costing your employer and what you're actually getting to spend. This is a very real and very serious problem, and there is genuinely, literally, only one way to fix it, and that is to reduce the gap between what you cost your employer and what you actually get to take home and get useful spending power out of. The only way to reduce that gap is to undo a lot of the taxes, the licenses, the regulations, the duties that we have to pay. We need to be repealing a lot of legislation, getting rid of a whole bunch of different taxes, simplifying life so that we keep more of our paycheck, or we cost our employers less. Either way helps the economy tremendously and helps with the cost of living crisis. But closing that gap requires the government to spend less because they're getting less in tax revenues and we can't just have ballooning deficits out the wazoo. So now we have to see a reduction in the amount of welfare and then the amount of funding for a whole bunch of different things in order to close that gap and deal with this cost of living crisis. But that's where the real problem lies because no one's willing to accept that. People aren't willing to actually have those programs be cut. If anything, they want more spending. They're looking at the cost of living crisis and saying to the government, you should be handing out more welfare. You should be meddling even more in the market. You should be putting price caps on things. You should be nationalising essential services like what we're seeing in Victoria with the return of the State Electricity Commission. We're seeing these sorts of failed strategies that nearly killed the Australian economy in the 70s and we had to dig our way out of very, very slowly. We're reintroducing a lot of these mistakes. Why? Because people are misunderstanding the problem. The cost of living crisis is because of the cost of government. It's taking away your purchasing power without you actually seeing it most of the time, but you have to fund it, which is why you can't make ends meet. When we understand the cost of government, we understand both what the problem is and what the solution is. The only question is, now that we understand the problem, are we going to do the right things to fix it? History would suggest probably not, but I'm an optimist, so we'll see. Make sure you like, subscribe, leave a comment, ring the bell, and I'll see you next time. In the meantime, I've got some cash to pick up. Looks like avocado is back on the menu, boys.